Hey, this is Prospector Jess. I'm sure you've heard of flood gold, but what is snow gold? Tonight we're going to talk about, over here, we're going to talk about this, which is kind of what's coming for tonight in the way of snow. Another 2 to 3 feet in the high Sierras. That's all that red stuff over there. Now, that's on top of, what we saw. I just posted a post showing, quite a few feet. I don't know what they're up to now, but it's probably pushing 20 feet in the top of the Donner Pass. They're down to one lane on I-80. That's like a, 4 lane, 5 lane kind of thing or more. Maybe 6 lanes going each way, interstate. So if I-80 is shutting down to one wagon trail, we got a problem, Houston. But we also have what I observe to be an opportunity. And that is that when snow comes down, as they say, what comes down must go down further. What goes up must come down. Well, this has already come down, but it's got to go down further to make it to the ocean, because that's where equilibrium is once snow melts. So watch this. I'm going to go through tonight a little bit and kind of explain a bit about what I'm getting at. But what I'm saying is this red stuff is stacking on top of 10 to 20 feet of snow already. So that means we're going 12 feet to 22, 24 feet. That's a lot of water. And this snowpack has been relatively heavy, which means it's high in water density. And that means an interesting feature when it comes to floods. So I'll talk a bit about that in a second, but I just wanted to ask you the question, what is snow gold? It's a term I just invented for the purposes of tonight's video explanation. So again, when these big storms are coming through, the atmospheric river continues, and we end up with lots and lots of water coming down in the form of precipitation and in the form of crystals, ice, snow, hail. And so both of those have the ability to create floods and to move gold if they're in large enough volume. Well, what we've got right now is a situation where we're having a little bit of both. We're having floods, and we're going to have more floods through the spring and into the summer potentially for areas of the Central Valley here in California. This is true, though, all the way up the Cascades and probably into British Columbia. And so this is really an unusual year when it comes to moving gold in the potential of what's going to happen. It's also an unusual year, and it's starting to bring back memories of people who a year or two ago were predicting that we may be on to a flood season comparable to what happened in the 1860s here in California. It literally shut the state down for over a month. Water was so high that all the streets in Sacramento were flooding all of the buildings. So basically, you've got the water levels rising to building levels, and basically nobody could occupy any of the state capitol. So it shut down our government. That's an interesting concept. But it also created havoc, and it was one of the worst years in terms of overall damage to the state. And so it's not something you would look forward to this year, but there is one silver lining to this storm, if you will, and that is the potential to move gold. We've talked about this over and over again this month. It's kind of our flood gold month. But in this case, we're going to talk about snow, the crystalline form or solid form of water. What happens when that solid form warms up? Let's take a look. So I'm going to flip you over to my desktop here, and we're going to go over here to full screen on the desktop. So again, we're still offering the GDU, the Gold Diggers Underground, Prospectors Bonanza Club thing. That's where you can learn a lot more about what I had to say about this. And there's a bunch of videos on how water moves gold and how gold concentrates in traps, and how rivers can be read, how you can look at minerals and rocks and things like that, and put this whole thing together. It's my integrated picture of how to find more gold. So I just want to bring that up. So let's take a look at what the U.S. government weather.gov's site is saying. Basically, it's got a snowcast for today, a snow forecast for today. We're looking at what's happening. It's Wednesday right now, but the snow forecast is from Wednesday through Thursday. They're expecting along this red zone where it's deep, deep red, there is going to be 30 to 36 inches of snow pack building up. And at a minimum in the yellow part, you're going to get 8 to 10 inches. So, you're going to get a foot of snow or up to 3, maybe possibly even 3.5 feet of snow here building up in the Sierras on top of an already existing snowpack that's tens of feet deep. So this thing is adding more to more. Last weekend was set a record, and so it's like this whole thing is a a global cooling dream. But basically, what you're going to have is a ton of material, tons and tons, teratons, that is built up and is stored behind the reservoirs. So much so, and it's so wet and heavy, that it's likely to create a scenario where it overtops the reservoirs. They cannot hold it all. We have not done a very good job of managing our reservoirs over the past few years, and we're finally in a stage now where we're trying to build the water back up. And you get into situations where politics interferes with Mother Nature, with acts of God, and what happens when weather conspires to move material like water in such volumes that we can't even conceive of it. And so this snowpack represents the greatest reservoir of water in the state of California, and typically is tapped all spring, summer, and sometimes into the fall for feeding all of the coastal areas such as San Francisco all the way to Los Angeles. And so you end up with all these aqueducts coming out of all these dams and reservoirs. The reservoirs are to fill with water and feed both human water needs and agriculture, which is the main use for that water. And so what ends up happening is when you involve politics, you divert some of that water out into the delta and into the ocean. So you basically bypass it and throw it away. That has consequences. The consequences being that you tend to do the wrong thing at the wrong time and can easily end up with your reservoirs in the wrong state. And so they can become like Oroville, where they start flooding out and overtopping. And a lot of these big reservoirs along the Sierra Nevada right through here are in that state right now. They're about to approach topping. And then when this stuff starts to melt in the spring, they will overtop. When that happens, you're going to get this kind of situation building up, which is already starting as of right now. So you can see this is a massive area that has just announced a huge flood warning. And what they're telling you, don't drive across flooded roads, be aware. Trust me, if you try to move out in moving water, it looks pretty still, and you're thinking idyllic. This is kind of like what it's like if I'm swimming in a river or a lake or whatever. No, it's not. This is danger. You just drop your front 2 tires in, and if it starts to move that, it'll drag the rest of your car in, and you'll be history. You will not make it out alive. And so it's one of those things where they have to warn people year after year. But the biggest cause of loss of life due to natural causes in terms of catastrophes is not hurricanes, it's not tornadoes, it's not earthquakes, it's floods. And so you've got to keep your eyes open under these conditions. So what's happening here? Well, what's happening right now is the precipitation from the rains is moving through these areas, especially the burn areas, and that's Redding, right? Chico around the Paradise Fire. And then we have several fires that have occurred down in the southern area here. We had the Telegraph, and we had the Rim Fire, and then we had the Mariposa thing. I forget what that was called this year. But we've had a bunch of fires all through this section. And then on the west side, we've had all kinds of fires up in here around Clear Lake and so forth. So what you're getting is it's time that the water starts flooding through when it falls. Now, that's not the snow melt. So let's take a look at this picture. So this was that snowcast, trademark. This was the snow forecast that we have for right now. What we've had, though, is some huge snow forecasts in the recent history that came through like last weekend, where this thing was, like purple. It was all the way to the max and then some. And so Redding got a huge amount. Oregon got a huge amount, stopped some trains over the last couple of days. Washington, same thing. So we have this huge snow building up all the way up and down the Cordilleras and all the way up and down the Sierras and into the Cascades. And so you've got this, Rocky Mountains are getting it, we're getting it, everybody's getting it. So let's take a look at what's going on. Oh, and you still have our precipitation forecast, which is, the rain itself, which is what's causing the flooding right now. Now that's 1/2 to 1 inch, 2 to 3 inches in Grass Valley, 1 to 2 inches in Yosemite. So that's enough rain to cause some serious flooding, especially like Yosemite with all the fires that have been through there in the last couple of years. We've talked about that in other videos. So what's going on here right now is we have a situation where we have to watch out that that snow, when it melts, is going to cause a problem down in these areas. In the 1860s, I don't remember the specific year, I could go look that up, there was that fantastic flooding that occurred. It was exactly this kind of scenario where the flooding conspired with another atmospheric river situation. In fact, that was the first one that they now believe was the first really recorded atmospheric event. In that, there were actually interviews of Indians that said, this is the year for, and they had some Indian name for the big waters. And essentially what they predicted was I believe it was the Miwoks, moved out of the valley, up out of the lowlands and into the hills and mountains to get up high enough to avoid the flooding that occurs during these things. So this isn't something new. This has been around way before the fad of global warming and everything else. Way before anybody politically announced it, these people knew of what the conditions were. And one of the things they used to predict it was some level of understanding of the calendar. But they also knew certain events were harbingers of this kind of condition. And the events were very much what we've been seeing, where you get these anomalous big storms, cells moving through, tornadoes, things like that happening, and large amounts of snow building up in the high Sierras. The minute that starts to happen, they just moved up and out. They said, this is the big one, and we don't want to drown. So that's what we have to look forward to this spring. When that happens, you can also imagine that in the summer and fall, when things start to abate a little bit in these big streams, and that's something to avoid during these periods, when the flood level starts dropping, you're going to have moved a tremendous amount of gold and a tremendous amount of ore and cobbles and rocks in. So it's going to be reburied, reconcentrated, removed, and tearing into mountainsides and hillsides on the way that have long been illegal to hydraulic mine. Well, nature's about to hydraulic mine on a scale we seldom see. And so this is something just to be aware of. I'm not trying to make light of these hardships that people are going to face or are facing in these areas. I'm just trying to point out from a gold prospector's perspective, this is how it happens. And so that's kind of tonight's discussion. Again, you've got snow levels rise to 6,000 feet, but they drop as low as 1,500 feet. I know of a few places that I prospect that are right at that level, and so they'll be under snow right now and ice, and be kind of painful to get it in the water unless you got a heater on your dredge, which is illegal, and all that good stuff. So it's one of those fun things that you can look forward to, is when this stuff clears out, there should be a lot more gold concentrated, but it's not going to be ordinary flood gold. It's going to be snow gold. The snow gold occurs, though, when it floods because of rapid heating in the Sierras. When that rapid heating hits, that pack, that snow pack we're talking about right here, is going to come out of there, and it can come out much faster than rainfall, because it'll take feet of snow and convert it into cubic feet of water. And these rivers that normally run maybe 80 to 90 cubic feet will be running thousands of cubic feet, and those that run tens of thousands will be running 100 to 800,000 cubic feet. They'll be way over their flood lines, ripping everything that's on the side, tearing at the riprap and things like that form the river channel, and the channels will start to move. And when they move, you'll see, like it's happening right now in the San Gabriels, that's happening up there. We're having it happen. Several people have posted some things up in the Yuba River area. We're already seeing the gold is moving. The river's changing its course, and that will change where gold will be found. So that's it for tonight. I just thought I'd do you the snow cast for tonight. Prospector Jess, weatherman for a day. Good prospecting. Over and out. See you tomorrow night.